Hey guys, happy Friday. First of all, glad to be Friday. It's been a busy week, but a productive week, and so happy about that. On last week's or on this week's podcast, we talked to Steve Kanzan. And Steve, I'm fortunate enough to, Steve has willingly joined us again today to be able to answer questions. Steve knows so much more about specifics around our IDE, any IDE in general than I do. So I was very happy that he was able to join us. I'll introduce him in a few minutes. I did want to spend a couple of minutes kind of reviewing some things that we talked about in the podcast. So let me share the screen that I've got. Hopefully you can see that now. We talked about a lot of different things with regards to the IDE and why organizations are starting to look at transitioning to a more modern integrated development environment. There's some reasons, I think good reasons, that organizations are beginning to do that. First and foremost, to ensure that these existing legacy systems, I don't even like to use the word legacy, but these critical systems that new developers who may not have as much experience in a TSO ISPF environment can come in and be able to support these applications that are so critical to the business. And it's not just the fact that they're able to support them, but from a business standpoint, being able to bring developers in who have grown up now with more of a graphical interface to software development and getting them up to speed quickly with them being able to modify this mainframe code has just been important, very important to the business. I think modernizing the developer experience with that graphical environment will enable an entire new generation of developers who may not have had prior experience with the platform. I think it's so important that we create a software development environment that is almost agnostic of the computer of which you're making code changes to, and being able to leverage a common look and feel with regard to navigating all of the requirements in software development is just a smart thing to do, but it makes so much more business experience. I think that new modern software development interfaces have such a huge impact on improving that development experience. I've been in the mainframe software business for as long as I have, very comfortable with ISPF. And, like most of us who've been on that platform for a long time, we were able to build macros and Rex files and TSO dialog panels that allowed us to do our work pretty quickly. But you really can't compare the productivity gains leveraging the green screen technology with a modern graphical interface. We've got so much more potential screen real estate, but given the same screen real estate, I can do a lot more in a point and click environment than I can a green screen environment, just because I'm moving back and forth between different services, capabilities that are needed to support software development. It's not only the editing, but it's access to my source control system, source control management system, access to my data manipulation technologies. All of those things are part of that software development experience, and a graphical environment just gives me the ability to do so much more faster, and so I think that's a good thing. I think that the capabilities of a graphical environment can have a significant impact, and we're going to talk about this next week in our podcast on program application understanding. The things that you can do from a charting standpoint, from a graphics standpoint, in a modern software development interface are phenomenal. And so again, if you're bringing in new developers to support and make modifications, changes, create new features, enhancements to these mainframe targeted systems, the ability to leverage the graphical interface to see structure charts, to see data flow diagrams, to see workflow diagrams, advanced searching capabilities. That experience is so much richer under a modern IDE. And then I think finally, the support that a modern IDE has in regards to agile support. And as organizations continue to move forward to an agile environment, that interface can make that transition. I think it makes it easier. I think the integration and interoperability it has with other tools that are a part of that software delivery process, again, makes it even more productive and a tool worth sharing. So at this point, I will stop sharing the slide and we'll get to the questions. But before we do that, a couple of housekeeping items before I introduce Steve. The mug, it's been a hit apparently. And so what we're doing now is we're going to continue on each of the live Q&A sessions to the person who asks the best question, and I get to determine the winner. We'll send you a good coding mug. And so if you've got questions about anything that we've talked about, or about the podcast, or about software development in general, particularly around the mainframe, and today more focused on the IDE, then please submit them in the chat box. You can get to the chat box by clicking at the bottom of the screen. You'll see a little blue bubble and it'll say chat. You can click on that, and then in there you'll have the opportunity to ask your question. So I hope you'll take advantage of that. Steve and I both love to talk about this stuff. So if you've got questions, enter in through the chat box, and you can enter your questions in there. I see we've already got several that are already popping up, and so we appreciate that. So best question, good coding mug, and thank you for being here. So at this point in time, I want to introduce Steve. Introduced him in the podcast, and as I said in the podcast, and I won't belabor it, Steve is one of my go-to guys as far as knowledge around DevOps and Compuware support of that. Saw him when I first joined the company, and have continuously been amazed at his knowledge, his depth, and he can go broad, but he can also go deep into a topic. So he was kind enough to join us on the podcast to discuss the IDE. And so I want to give Steve, I'll give you another second for folks who may have not heard you on the podcast to reintroduce yourself. Tell us about your role at Compuware and the things you're working on. So if you'll do that, then I'll start hitting the questions.
Thanks, Rick, and love to join you and definitely appreciate all the dialogue we've had over the years. So my role at Compuware is I'm the group product manager for our Topaz and ISPW product line. So really encompassing the app dev experience around the Compuware products. So I lead the team of product management that works directly with our engineering team to develop new features that are going into our products that help our end users become more productive in their mainframe development. And I've worked on a variety of different things over the years, but some of the things we're working on most recently obviously heavily revolve around Topaz and how Topaz can help people become more productive, how we can continue to advance the art of mainframe development within Topaz, and also how we can connect it in with the broader ecosystem of tools that exist in enterprises. So it's definitely been an exciting journey, and a journey that never ends, because software development or engineering just continues to evolve at a pace. And it's nice to be able to bring some of these modern concepts, modern practices, modern tools that are used on the distributed technologies like JavaScript and Java, etc., that are used to develop mobile apps. There's obviously difference in technology platforms, but there's a lot of things that mainframe development can also benefit from that haven't haven't historically existed there. So it's a exciting role, exciting opportunity that we have at Compuware.
Yeah, it really is. One of my favorite things when before COVID, I would spend some time in Detroit on a regular basis, and one of my favorite things was to go to Steve's office to see what he's working on or what his guys are working on. So always interesting stuff. Again, I always learn. So with that, let me make sure I get through my checklist. I've done everything I need to do. I think I have. So I think we're ready for questions. So I'm gonna rely on Steve to answer most of these. I'll try to chime in where I can add value. But let me start. Looks like the first question is from Wahid. And Wahid asks us, is the Topaz IDE built on Eclipse? And then the follow-up question is, can it interoperate with other Eclipse plugins? Steve, you want to take that?
Yeah, a great question. And the Topaz IDE is built on Eclipse technology. And one of the reasons that we are built around Eclipse is the ecosystem of tools that exist around Eclipse. There are a lot of different capabilities. Obviously, we built a lot of capabilities to support our tools, but other vendors have done the same. And then it also provides a platform for cross-platform development, cross-technology development. So we do have customers that leverage Eclipse on their Java applications, for example. And one of the things that they're interested in is the ability to bring developers from different disciplines, from a technology standpoint, bring them together in a common way. So it removes some of the barriers that have historically existed around the mainframe having its own kind of unique 3270 based tools. So
yeah,
we are based on Eclipse. And again, we can be installed into other Eclipse environments. So if you have an Eclipse environment, we can install our plugins into that environment. And we also have the ability through our install to lay down an Eclipse-based environment through Topaz Workbench that other plugins can be installed in.
Yeah, I think that you said something that's important to me. When I was at IBM and now with Compuware, one of the things that I talk to clients about, and I think it's important, is that that Eclipse gives us the opportunity. And again, there are other options and different developers like different environments. I'm good with that. I understand that. But I do like the idea of developers starting to work around a common interface for the development or maintenance of software, regardless of target. And it's more for business reasons than it is for technical reasons, because I can, if I've got teams, I've got limited resources, if I need to move those folks around, and I think that we will see a day when developers will be able to support code changes or new code development, regardless of target. And I think that Compuware has done a good job in providing a development interface experience that can start us down that path. So, okay, next question from Elizabeth. And Elizabeth asks, this is tough. Why should I move away from a TSO ISPF environment that I have been very productive with? And I can understand that question, being with the hand color that mine is. So Steve, you want to answer that?
Yeah, and we talked about this a little bit in the webcast. Definitely, if you're comfortable in something, change, you can look at change as something, you might not embrace. But you have to kind of take a step back and look at, are there more productive ways that you can work that maybe you're not comfortable with at this moment because they're new to you, but they do offer the ability to become more productive.
Yeah.
And it's really, you can have, and Chris O'Malley talks about this a lot, you can have a fixed mindset, or you can have a growth mindset. And there's a valid argument. You say, I've been doing this, I know exactly how to do it, I'm comfortable with that, and I'm going to stay there. Or you can have the mindset of, this is something new. I want to explore it. I want to understand how I can change the patterns of how I work to leverage the new technology and be more productive. So for the existing people that have worked in a certain way for a period of time, there can be an adjustment curve, but ultimately you're going to see the productivity gains by some of the additional capabilities that just don't exist on a TSO ISPF based environment. Now, one of the things we do have in Topaz Workbench is the ability to have an emulator with where you could bring up a ISPF environment. But ultimately, I think people will get the most value, the most productivity by leveraging new ways of working versus continuing within the pattern that they've done. And ultimately, I think businesses demand that, the environment demands that, because let's face it, people coming into the IT realm that are starting to work have not been trained on ISPF. They're not going to be familiar with it. And there can be a lot of resistance to wanting to work within that. So, overall, for the health of the company, for the demands of working faster and working in a more agile manner, and the need to bring in new talent, there's a need to re-examine how things have always been done, because continuing down the path that things have always been done will probably ultimately not end in a successful outcome for the companies.
Yeah, no, and I couldn't agree more, Steve. I think that, I think we talked about on the podcast that from a productivity standpoint, it's almost a non-argument. I mean, I still have those discussions with developers sometimes, but we did, I think we talked about the benchmarking work that we did at my last company, and then we put together 100 different tasks, mainframe software development tasks, and then we had the developers, and I think we had 30 total developers. 10 of them were novice type developers, 10 of them were 5 years, 2 to 5 years, and then 10 of us were over 5 years of experience in a TSO ISPF environment. And all three categories, or all three groups of people, were, I think the number was around 25% more productive in total in a graphical environment than in TSO ISPF. And so from a productivity standpoint, I think you just can be just much faster. I look at it from a this may be a soft sell, but from a business perspective, I think it's where people like myself can make a difference for their organizations as they're bringing new people in. We've got a lot of experience and knowledge with regards to application development on the platform. I think we have a responsibility to share that knowledge and that information to those that may not be familiar with the interfaces that we grew up with. And so I think being able to share the knowledge that we have about the applications and maybe the idiosyncrasies of the platform, but by leveraging an interface that new developers coming in are more familiar with and can be more productive with, I think we have a responsibility to help those people out. And I think that's another reason. And then I think you said two things that I think are critical. It's to reduce the learning curve and the associated cost of that learning curve. And the second one is critical, real important, to be able to recruit new talent. Being able to find new resources that want to come and be a part of something special, to spend 4 years, 6 years in college trying to master or learn a craft, and then to be able to not be able to leverage what you've learned in your first software job can be challenging and difficult. So it's hard to get the best and the brightest. So providing a modern software development environment that they're comfortable with, that they've seen, that they've got some experience with, is going to make them feel better. I think make the company more attractive to come be a part of. Next question is from Barrett. And Barrett writes, in the podcast, you mentioned the key drivers for transitioning to a more modern IDE are more business focused than technology focused. Can you expand on that? Yeah, we've probably already done a little bit of that. Again, I'll just reiterate, and then Steve, I'll ask you if you've got any additional thoughts to it. To me, it's about shortening learning curves, getting new people more productive faster. I think the productivity is going to have an impact on the total life cycle time for a project or for work. And then I think recruiting. And so those 3-4 things I think are critical business drivers for at least investigating and looking at a different way to maintain and to create new code.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. When companies are looking at their mainframe development, and they're looking, how can I leverage this as an asset? How can I, oftentimes the mainframe had historically fallen into like a maintenance cycle with long release cycles, more a waterfall approach that doesn't meet the needs of the business today. So the companies that are leaning in and trying to address that, trying to become more agile, trying to get more through the system, more throughput, more velocity. When you look at that problem, the mainframe IDE that you're using becomes one of the critical things that you want to look at to get productivity gains and to get more through the system with the same people, the same approach that you have now. You need to reinvent that. The IDE is a critical part of that. The way the IDE integrates into your delivery pipeline, your code promotion pipeline is another critical point, and it's something that needs to be considered. So you do need to look holistically at your whole delivery pipeline. And then obviously the start of that delivery pipeline is what the developers are interacting with daily, and the automation that you want to put in place along the way to get the changes that they made into production as rapidly as possible. So it is about the business drivers. You don't want to just change technology for technology's sake. You want to look at things holistically. The business drivers you mentioned around, bringing new people into the mainframe are critical. And then I would argue more critical is getting more through your system with, the same or better quality is another critical business driver for the business.
No, you're exactly right. I mean, this whole initiative around DevOps and modernizing the software development environment, in my mind, is all about speed at the end of the day, from a business standpoint. And so any of the activities or work that's associated with software development, we need to be looking at those and making and determining if there are better, faster ways we can accomplish, the work or do the work that we're doing. Next question comes from Larry. Larry says, I definitely would want you to talk about this one, Steve. He says, can you talk a little bit about the features in Topaz that have an impact on the speed of delivery, since we're just talking about speed? So features in Topaz that have a direct impact on speed of delivery.
So there's a lot of things inside Topaz that will help with that, but I'll talk about two critical capabilities that I see. One is the ability to understand. I mean, let's face it, these mainframe applications have been built up over the course of decades. A lot of times they have grown up in a way that makes them very, very difficult to understand. They have tech debt, if you will, within the system. And you need tools that allow you to quickly understand what those programs are doing so that you can modify them quickly. you don't want to get into a situation where you want to make, let's say, you're in the insurance business, you want to offer a new type of insurance, so you need to modify some codes, etc., within your system, and it takes you 6 months, 9 months, whatever, just to understand what's the changes and identify all those. You want to be able to understand that quickly, and the reality is you probably are losing expertise in that of the people that develop those systems. So you want something that will help you break down, understand the logic, understand the flow of those applications. Sometimes these applications can be tens of thousands of lines, and you need to really be able to understand that. So that's one key point, is speeding up the analysis cycle so you can get to the point of making changes. When you've changed the code, the next step in that process is testing it. So how quickly can you test the code? And one thing that we've seen across the board, and, you know, this is just a general problem with software development, but definitely I think it's even a larger problem in mainframe software development, is automated testing, you know, is something that, particularly around applications that are older, hasn't been built up, it hasn't been maintained. And that's a critical thing. You want to be able to change code, and you want to be able to get feedback on that code as rapidly as possible. So the automated testing capabilities that are built in with Topaz, and also ultimately within your pipeline, those are critical to speed up the productivity of developers. Yeah. So not wasting cycles, repeating the same sets of manual tests, or having a developer that has, you know, their kind of unique way of testing, and then the next developer reinvents the wheel with their own unique way of testing. You don't have an asset that can be reused by anyone that's coming to develop and modify a particular program. So that's a key thing, that, you know, the amount of time that's spent in manual testing, if you can regain that time, you're going to directly improve your velocity, that you can change your programs.
I definitely cannot agree. Prior to my years at IBM, I ran practice at Hewlett-Packard Consulting, where we focused on the modernization of existing software. And I won't go into the details, but in managing that business and being the lead architect in that business, the two areas that consume the most labor and were the most costly for our clients were the two you just talked about. First is testing. It consumes a tremendous amount of time. But second was impact analysis and application understanding and discovery. For new resources being brought into an application in order to try to make modifications to that to improve the quality of the product, or to improve I'll call it changeability, the ability to make changes faster if it was a very dynamic application, and they wanted an architecture that would allow you to expedite changes faster than under the current architecture. So we did a lot of that re-engineering work. In doing that work, again, those two things were impact analysis, application understanding on the front end, and testing on the back end, which is a great segue. I'm glad you said that, because next week we're going to talk about application understanding and application discovery. And in the following week, we're going to do a couple of weeks on testing. So, again, I hope people will join us for that. But no, you're absolutely right. In that IDE and access to those capabilities within an IDE without having to move around, get into new tools, is so important in shortening that cycle time. So yeah, I agree. Next question is from Rafi. We talked about this in the podcast. How is the IDE connected to build, test, and deployment automation?
So from the IDE perspective, you want to get to the point of having an environment where the developers can change code, and they can, let's say, right click, get that code compiled, right click, get that code tested.
Yeah.
Type of automation within your IDE. So the interconnection between the changing of the code, the amount of time it takes in, you to initiate that code being compiled on the mainframe, and then ultimately tested and deployed is a critical thing. So your IDE, you need to deal with that aspect of how your source code management is integrated into the IDE, and also your testing process is integrated into the IDE. So it's at the fingertips of the developers, and then ultimately it's part of a pipeline as that code's being promoted, and you want to automate as much of that pipeline as you possibly can. So you have the right checks in that pipeline that are automated with the minimal amount of manual steps within that process. So
Yeah.
it's, again, you need to look at that full delivery pipeline and make sure that the developers are armed with everything they need in order to get that code to the point where they can turn it over into the next stage within that pipeline. And then you want that pipeline to be automated to the point where there's no more manual steps than you absolutely require. And, let's face it, for large enterprises, you do want to have, the approvals of changes going into production, but you really want to not have things like I submit a change control and then some other group picks that up and then they compile my code. Like, those types of things just are massive productivity drains that will, ultimately result in a lot of time being wasted where it doesn't need to be.
Yeah, I tell folks all the time in meetings I have with them, we talk about, in an agile world, what is or what defines done. And, at one point in time, the answer was working code, which is the traditional agile answer. I think you can add another step to that: working code and a test case scenario plan to support that code. I think should be part of every deliverable, within a story, to make modification code or create new code. That it should be an associated test case. And so, as you just said, in agile teams where you've got developers and testers working together, the ability to coordinate and to build those test case scenarios as you're working on that code will have an impact on not only the speed at which you can provide that, but the quality of what is produced. Let's see. Next question comes from Hakeem. Hakeem asked, what are the key must-haves in a modern IDE? I think we just kind of hit on that, a couple of them. Anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think we talked about a decent amount of them. Obviously, from a mainframe IDE, you want your IDE to provide access to the resources that exist on the mainframe. You want the ability to edit those resources, whether that's code in a source code editor or data in data editors across the different mainframe technologies. Both of those are critical points because you want the developers to be able to have everything they need in order to build and test their programs, set up scenarios. So that edit capability across technologies. And then we've talked about the analysis capabilities, the testing capabilities, and the integration with your SCMs. So all of those components are critical. And I'll add, I guess, another layer. We did talk about this, but you want a platform that allows you to work within the tool set that you have. And that tool set ultimately is going to span a lot of different components that you want a platform where there's support for that. So, a lot of times you can look at things and say, oh, I want the shiniest new technology out there, and I'm going to choose that for my IDE, but you do need to take a step back and say, is the ecosystem there for me really to accomplish my job within that technology? Or, if it's not, you really have to question, is it going to make you more productive, or are you just going to run into obstacles along the way? So the ecosystem within the platform, I think, is you choose for your IDE is really critical.
And the last question comes from Sanders. Sanders asks, can I access, it sounds like a legacy Compuware customer, can I access FileAid, strobe services, ISPW from Topaz? What do I need to support this?
Yeah, so there's, we kind of touched on this, but there's support for accessing all of Compuware's application development suite from within Topaz. So the ability to edit data, set up test data, ultimately that connects back into FileAid on the mainframe. There's the ability to, when you're submitting jobs, also to connect to strobe in order to capture performance metrics and triggers strobe measurements. ISPW, we have a very comprehensive integration with ISPW that will allow you to get your source code, modify that source code, build it, deploy it. All that's built within the ISPW portion of Topaz. And then the other one that's not on this list, but I think is really important for developers, is we do have integration with Abendate as well, because ultimately, you're going to find your program has some sort of abend in it. You want to be able to understand what caused that. What was it? A data condition? Where in the code did this occur? And so Topaz does have integration with Abendate that gives that information right to the developers.
Yeah, another one, the Expediter. Yeah, your debugging capabilities. I don't think Sanders asked about that, but I mean, obviously those are critical to software development. Again, those services are available right under Topaz. It's one of the things I love about Topaz when I joined the company was that yes, the interface was relatively new at the time I joined. It's fairly mature. It's very mature now. But it was accessing services that were tried and true. Very stable. It just provided another interface into those services that with the intent of keeping the developer within that ecosystem to do everything that they needed to do. Again, it's, as we've talked about, it's so much more than just code manipulation or writing new code. There's a lot of work and activities involved in producing that code. And so what Topaz is trying to do, what we try to do, is to provide the developer with all those services and capabilities needed to support their work.
Yeah, and Expediter is a great example of, I get a lot of feedback on, just kind of the wow factor of debugging from Topaz versus what was possible within TSO ISPF type interfaces. Just the amount of information that you can see and quickly look at definitely helps people with the debugging process. And just, again, it's a kind of a wow factor. And then on top of that, we have capabilities from program analysis with things like Runtime Visualizer, where you get, a diagram, how things are going, what the call interactions are as you're debugging the program. It really can be a huge benefit for people trying to understand these complex applications.
I think it's a good way to end the live Q&A today. I think that we just kind of hit on the primary drivers or the reasons for why that modern interface can have such a huge impact on your software development activities. The ability or the way it can present information in a graphical format, it's just so much easier and faster and quicker to understand by today's developers versus providing data dumps in some table that can be read, traditional green screen type data presentation. I know we're getting better at it, but the abilities from a charting standpoint, from a graphic standpoint, I think so much better and so much easier to use, so much easier to learn, and with that, significantly increased productivity. So I don't see any other questions, so let's wrap it up. Steve, again, thank you, man. Really appreciate you coming on here. You have done a lot of stuff for me here at Compuware, a lot of stuff for our customers, and everybody appreciates the effort you're putting in. So thanks for joining us today. Steve, I'm hoping, I haven't asked him yet, but I'm hoping that Steve will be able to join us in some future segments when we talk about continuous integration, continuous delivery. And so we'll look forward to that. But again, thank you, buddy. I appreciate it very much.
No problem, and love to join again. Definitely passionate about continuous integration and continuous delivery. So.
Me too. They're gonna have to control us when we start talking about that stuff, because that's where the real power of this modern software delivery environment is. Guys, thank you very much. If you need additional information about the podcast, or you want to get to prior podcasts, or you want to listen to the one Steve and I did this past week, you can go to compuware.com/goodcoding, and you'll get access to all the podcasts, I think recordings to all live Q&A. We hope that you'll take advantage of that. We hope that this information is useful and valuable, and we appreciate your time very much today. Next week, as I mentioned, podcast is going to be about application and understanding and discovery, and the impact that can have to modern software developers. So with that, we'll close out. Again, one last thing, on Twitter, there's a hashtag good coding. Hope you'll use that again to get access to information about what we're doing, what we're talking about, and we hope that you will join us next week. We appreciate, again, your time. Have a great weekend, a productive week next week, and we'll see you soon. Good coding, everybody. Take care.